third episode of Avatar begins with Aang telling Katara how excited he is to show her and Sokka the air temple that he has such fond memories of. Following this, we see Zuko preparing to hunt him down. However, he's interrupted by Zhao, who invites him and Iroh to dinner after overhearing some of their conversation. Then Katara tries to tell Aang that his people may have been killed by the Fire Nation, emphasizing their ruthlessness and the fact that they killed her mother. As he sees the Southern Air Temple, he says, "We're home, buddy. We're home." Meanwhile, Zuko listens to Zhao talk about how the Earth Kingdom will soon be under Fire Nation rule, but Zuko states that his father is a fool if he thinks the rest of the world will follow him willingly. Zhao replies with, 2 years at sea have done little to temper your tongue. So why did I just spend a whole paragraph summarizing information that you could easily glean just from watching the show again? Well, that's because this structure shows a pattern that persists throughout much of Avatar, a pattern of going back and forth between Aang and Zuko, a way that the show firmly solidifies Zuko as the deuteragonist of this story. Part of this is that Zuko's best sections tend to reflect Aang's, or more accurately, Aang and Zuko's sections reflect and complement one another's, revealing meanings in the other aspect of the narrative, while reminding us that this is a narrative about the convergence of multiple perspectives. Of course, this isn't always the case, but in episode 3 it most certainly is. Let's consider the little rundown I already gave. Aang is excited about going back to a place from his past, while Zuko's reminders of his past are consistently negative. While Zuko's own father most completely exemplifies the negative parts of the Fire Nation, Zhao is a close second, and that's his main purpose in the story. Sure, Zuko can be invited to dinner and can see people that have a connection to his nation, still someone who's lost the ability to form meaningful relationships with people from his kingdom. While death is, of course, more permanent than that, there are still obvious connections there. Here we see two wildly different representations of home, but each of them result in many of the same things: loneliness, isolation, loss, an inability to go back. I could go on comparing and contrasting Aang and Zuko, but there are going to be plenty of opportunities to do that as this series and even just this episode progresses, and this episode has a lot more to it beyond that. This is connected to what I see as the central concept of this episode. Things change with time. The world is much different now than it was before, and Aang isn't going to be able to get that back. Of course, as this idea is integral to Aang's character, it makes sense to dive into it so early into the series. And though it was a smart move to not begin by focusing on Aang, it's a similarly smart move to show us more about his past fairly quickly. After all, he is the protagonist of the series, regardless of the broader themes that are at play in this work. Here, the importance of knowing and telling the truth is highlighted, as Katara and Sokka learn, before Aang does, that all the airbenders that once lived here are dead and gone. They learn that this place is nothing like it was before and that there's no going back. While Sokka wants to tell Aang the truth almost immediately, Katara does not, despite the fact that she initially tries to. She just can't bring herself to crush his childish optimism. Of course, he ends up discovering that truth on his own and, in anger, alerts the Fire Nation and all the other nations of his presence. Not only that, but he discovers the truth while he's having arguably the most fun he's had since returning here, while he chases Momo around until he stumbles upon his teacher's dead body. In this moment, Katara's decision to keep Aang ignorant, combined with his somewhat childish but totally understandable desire to return to this place and attempt to reclaim lost time, results in Aang's role being thrust upon him even faster and in an even more aggressive manner than it otherwise would have been. Now, instead of Zhao and Zuko knowing about his existence, along with some select Fire Nation troops, in an instant, all the nations know. Now people have expectations, and that means that he has gone from representing the distant potential for change to being a beacon for change. So now he's either a symbol of hope or a symbol of potential defeat, and either reaction reinforces his role of the Avatar over what he personally wants. In my mind, this shows the importance of facing the truth and accepting it. Otherwise, it can find us, and if we aren't prepared, things can quickly spiral out of control. If Katara had told Aang about the Fire Nation masks, if she hadn't tried to shield him, well, then maybe he would have at least been prepared enough that he wouldn't have lost it in this manner. Maybe Aang would have been able to follow his master's advice to not concern ourselves with what once was and to act on what is. One thing that's incredibly important to point out is that this is not, however, entirely Aang running away from responsibility. In fact, he's also actively moving towards it, as he chooses to go find someone who can help him figure out this whole Avatar thing. This just happens to be tied up with his home. This points to the fact that no matter what, Aang's home and his role are intertwined. He can't separate who he is from his role. There is no past when he wasn't the Avatar. I mean, sure, there's a past where he doesn't remember being the Avatar, but he's still always been that. It's in this way that Aang's longing for an identity outside of this role is so tragic, and though this is by no means a unique conflict for a chosen one type character to have, Avatar has done a wonderful job of showing how interconnected this role is with Aang's past, despite his apparent disappointment in that fact. A disappointment that will become all the more evident as episodes go by. This, again, connects with Zuko. Just as Aang steps into the room where he can accept his destiny and where he believes he'll find some level of guidance, Zuko's ability to actualize his goal of capturing the Avatar is taken from him by Zhao. Why? In part because he's a teenager, as Zhao is sure to remind us. He's too young for this, too young for such a responsibility. So what about Aang? He's even younger than Zuko, and his goal he's inherited is at least as lofty as the one Zuko inherited. Again, the way Zuko is treated accentuates certain aspects of Aang's character. This way, without a character even directly talking to Aang in this manner, that connection is made. They're both just too young. It's at this point that we're told about the Avatar cycle and shown that the previous Avatar was a firebender. Already, the show starts to build towards one of Aang's ultimate confrontations. His confrontation with the fact that he's going to need to accept that firebending, that the Fire Nation, is just as important as any other aspect of his training and his journey, regardless of the destructive power of firebending or what the Fire Nation did to his people. It's in this way that Aang will eventually need to place the needs of the world so completely above his own needs, adopting a holistic perspective in the place of his understandably fractured one. Already, the interconnected nature of the world is being built into the very structure through which the Avatar passes through time. And that's without going into how the cycle represents the importance of history, of all those who came before, of the lessons one can learn from the past, even if they can't go back to that time. It's rare that a system of power so thoroughly aligns with the show's central themes, and whenever I contemplate this natural integration, I'm always impressed by its elegance, simplicity, and meaning. I could go on and on about what inheritance means in this story, and even just in this episode, because while Aang has inherited all this Avatar stuff, Zuko's inherited something else. A scar that encapsulates so much about him. A scar over his face, over his eye. An event that has colored his whole world in perspective ever since, that has shaped his identity in disturbing and horrific ways. But we'll talk about that more later. Another aspect of this whole Avatar thing I love is how Aang's personal problems get in the way of his ability to control his power. Again, this isn't all that uncommon in Chosen One type stories. In fact, in most of these stories I've read, the Chosen One needs to learn to place the needs of others over their own emotional reactions and responses. Otherwise, their powers can be enormously destructive. Now, this may be common, but it's important to stop and think about what this structure provides. This means that the needs of others need to be placed over the needs of the self. The needs of the self are, in the end, destructive and uncontrollable. Selfishness, albeit understandable selfishness, becomes a rage so all-consuming that Aang's sight is stolen from him. It's in this way that Avatar uses such a common narrative device in a complete manner, in a way that doesn't merely abide with typical narrative constructions because it can, but because it serves an enormously important purpose. And already, at this early stage, we're seeing that Zuko is more complex than a simple villain. The most obvious and striking moment where this is evident is when he has the chance to blast Zhao, but chooses not to. Here we see the merciful side of Zuko, that despite his anger, he doesn't derive any pleasure from hurting others. Iroh has a similar moment when he tells Zhao that he's a disgrace and that Zuko has more honor than he does. Up until now, Iroh's goofy side has received way more emphasis than his serious and caring side, so it's good to see that element of his character in the spotlight here. Then, as Zuko asks Iroh if he's serious about that, about the idea that Zuko has more honor, it's clear that Zuko does care about his uncle's opinion, that he does just want acceptance from others. Overall, this is a wonderful episode, and one that really makes it clear just how mature this series can get. In episode 4, Sokka has to confront the idea that his sexist generalizations are incorrect, while Aang has got to stop vying for attention from Katara with such persistence. Or to put it another way, Aang needs to stop putting so much importance in receiving attention from Katara, and needs to realize that she still cares for him even if other stuff is going on that she has to take care of. However, it is important to mention that, with Aang, his conflict isn't just related to Katara or to some selfish want to be noticed. Aang also understands that, when other people know he's the Avatar, it gives them a sense of hope that they haven't had in a long time. So it's not as though Aang's want for attention always boils down to something entirely selfish. Sometimes, Aang's want for attention stems from this empathetic understanding of others, to an aspect of his character that can be good, to his desire to make others happy. While I have no problem with these topics being explored, I find this episode to be a bit of a mixed bag. In particular, I'm not fond of how Aang's conflict in this episode is developed here. This whole conflict is treated in a very lighthearted manner, which particularly shows itself in the interactions Aang and Katara have. For example, Katara does stuff like stick her tongue out at Aang when she's annoyed with him, and they have these comedic, snappy back and forths with one another. While there's nothing inherently wrong with a lighthearted tone here, I wish that the conflict had developed into something a bit more serious. After all, this is an important lesson for Aang to learn, and I think that if this conflict had been given the chance to develop, specifically between Aang and Katara, from playful to sincere, it could have given this episode a more dynamic arc, while also showing how critical of a lesson this is for Aang. Instead, this conflict stays consistent in its levity throughout almost the whole episode. Aang and Katara make up with a simple apology, and then the village gets attacked, and though something very serious happens, there's no build-up to that moment. Now, I want to be clear in saying that my problem here has nothing to do with realism in dialogue or character interactions. It's not like a real person couldn't say this stuff, couldn't articulate themselves this way, or that a real-life conflict couldn't develop in this manner. My problem instead lies with this question. What does Aang and Katara's disagreement here add to the story? At best, I think this adds to their general dynamic, with Katara being hopeful but still somewhat cautious when Aang's learning is concerned, and Aang being a bit too carefree or overconfident. But we already see that throughout the other episodes. That's just relevant a lot of the time in more small ways that add up. Even if you enjoyed this episode, and I can definitely see why you might, these Aang and Katara sections add very little to the overall narrative and delve into ideas that are found elsewhere in the series. Besides, this episode could have put more time into Sokka's character development here, and into his relationship with Suki, as she's going to be a returning character of a decent level of importance, and it's going to be quite some time until we see her again. That would have been nice. So let's talk about that aspect of the episode. Here, Sokka's sexist tendencies that were established in the first episode create some issues for him, as he's forced to confront the fact that just because he's a man, that doesn't automatically make him stronger than women. This is important for a couple reasons. First of all, it shows just how small Sokka's world has been up until now. He hasn't been exposed to different places, and he presumably has never had the opportunity to meet a group like the warriors of Kyoshi. Second, this allows us to get introduced to a different side of Sokka, to the Sokka who will drop his pride pretty quickly, and who's willing to learn because he wants to be the best warrior he can be. In this moment, when Sokka goes back to these warrior girls after they've humiliated him, he's displaying maturity and tenacity. Furthermore, the fact that he's able to learn so quickly from them shows that he has a lot of potential and that he's willing to work hard. This makes it clear just how important expanding our worldview can be when it comes to confronting our own prejudices or lack of experience. And where many are unwilling to improve once they realize how hard it can be, Sokka is willing to. As you can tell, I like a lot about how this section is handled, despite the fact that I think this episode's time would have been better spent here than with Aang and Katara's conflict. However, some problems do pop up because of this lack of time. For one, Suki is decidedly underdeveloped, and the fact that she gives Sokka a kiss at the end just feels a bit out of left field. I mean, I understand what the writers were going for. Suki is a woman who likes men. She gives Sokka a kiss because, as she says, she can be a girl and a warrior at the same time. I think this is a fine way of showing that, but I feel that hers and Sokka's relationship has only really begun developing when this just kind of happens. It's not a huge problem or anything, but it didn't feel particularly in line with what had been established about her character. Maybe if more time had been given to this, that wouldn't have been the case. But even if the episode had allotted all of its time to this, it's no easy feat to develop a romantic relationship in a 20-ish minute long episode of television. However, beyond Suki's development, I'd say that this episode does a pretty good job of exploring Sokka's character. There is one moment in particular with this Sokka section that bothers me though. It's a problem of humor. It's in this moment, when Sokka realizes how much pride there is to be taken in the warrior's uniform, only to have Aang say, "Hey Sokka, nice dress." And then Sokka goes back to looking a bit self-conscious and a goofy sound effect plays. My issue with this is that the use of humor here undercuts how serious of a character moment this is for Sokka. To be fair to Aang and Katara's conflict, that was consistently handled with levity, so if you like to see character conflicts explored in that manner, that could absolutely work for you. I just don't like that type of tone for serious character building moments, though it is admittedly consistent and absolutely subjective. Here with Sokka though, the inconsistency is jarring and it stops the viewer from dwelling on this development for Sokka, and instead pushes them to rush along with the rest of the episode. And this isn't the first time the show has had a problem with humor. There was another similar moment in episode 2, when Sokka gets beaten up by Zuko and some goofy sound effects play as he gets poked in the face with a stick, and then a whistle and tuba sound plays. Another example from episode 2 is when Sokka does the same type of thing to Zuko, when Zuko's trying to climb up and he pokes him in the head with that goofy sound effect again. This is a problem that, to a certain degree, persists for some time in Avatar. For people like me who don't like this sound effect-based humor, it does lessen the impact of some of the show's fights and some of the moments when characters develop. I know that some people are far more receptive than I am to shifts in tone and levity in action though, so again, your mileage may vary with this. It's important to note, however, that I do enjoy some of this humor. For example, Zuko saying that Aang must be a master of evasive maneuvering, but Aang, Katara, and Sokka are actually lost? That's a good goof. And Aang doing this crazy run away from this giant fish? Another good goof. How about this guy foaming at the mouth? It's great and highly memeable. In my opinion, the best uses of humor in this show occur when there isn't major character development happening, when the stakes are relatively low, and that's something that all of these moments I just mentioned have in common. So with all of this in mind, my opinion of episode 4 is mixed, but I don't think it's a bad episode. It's still quite a bit of fun. I just don't feel that it's quite as good as episodes 1 through 3. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. Of course, I'm going to be continuing with the rest of the series in part 3, so if you enjoyed this and you haven't subscribed yet, I recommend that you do. And I specifically want to thank all my patrons over on patreon.com who make it possible for me to make all these videos and these long series, and all their support just means so much to me, so thank you to all of you. I'm sure that many of you are watching this. So anyway, I look forward to hearing from you down in the comments below about your thoughts on these episodes, and I hope that you have an awesome day. Bye-bye.